share. And this has been a really long journey. I first tried MDMA in March of 1984, and I was set up on a blind date and was with some friends, and by this time I had spent quite a bit of time exposed to drug culture, 80, 81, 82, 83. You guys probably, some of you don't know those years, but I was a model and I was out on the club scene a lot, so I kind of burned out. And I was staying home a lot, and I wanted some spiritual nourishment. And so anyway, I got roped into this blind date, couldn't stand my blind date. And my friends asked me if I wanted to try some ecstasy. I'd heard of it, but I was sort of like, I don't think so. I'd had a bad experience with a Quaalude once, and I was like, and so I never embraced Nancy Reagan's just say no policy. And she talked me into it. I said, okay, fine. So it wasn't very long before I realized, when this started kicking in, that this was something very different, very unique, and not your average recreational drug. So I was like, oh my gosh, I was in a kind of a dive place, and the music and the smoke and the people, I was like, I had to get out of here. So I went outside to get some fresh air, and I was walking like a sobriety test, and I just kept saying, I love myself, what is this stuff? And then I rolled my head back, and there was a full moon directly above me. And that was the first time I heard my inner voice. And very, very clearly, whether it was the moon or whatever, I felt a very strong voice that said, go home. And if you've ever experienced a spiritual awakening, like Ashley described, and I'm sure a lot of you have because of psychedelics, it was kind of shocking because I'd never heard something so loud that was not my own thought. And so I went inside, I told my friends, look, I need to go home. And so they accommodated me. I went home. I knew I had to go look in the mirror. I went to the bathroom, turned the lights on, went to the mirror, and I'd never seen pupils dilated before. So needless to say, I took a journey and kind of swam into my pupils and said things I never would have said, and I had a full-on spiritual awakening. So that same night, somebody walked up to me, tapped me on the shoulder, and insisted that he had to see me again. He said, there's just something about you, you've captivated me. Corny pickup line, I know, but it worked. So I wasn't interested in giving him my phone number, but I just rattled it off. I said, if you can remember my phone number, you can call me. I just wanted to go home. So that man, 8 months later, was the man I married. He was the number 2 person in the nation to take MDMA recreational. Michael Clegg was the first person who took MDMA recreational, also there in Dallas, if I didn't say I'm from Dallas. And my husband was a Stanford Law School graduate. He knew Michael Clegg. I never met Michael Clegg, but I had heard that Pauline Clegg turned my husband on to ecstasy. My husband never did drugs. He was a health freak and very successful, didn't really fit the mold, but he opened me up to metaphysics, introduced me to a lot of books. I deified him. He was the love of my life. He also had a lot of demons. And because I have to rush through this story and jump through so I can also get to some very pertinent parts of it, if there's any holes and you want more information, you can seek me out and I'm happy to share more. But after 3 years, well, his demons were triggered by alcohol, 2 drinks, and this other person would emerge that I really hadn't met, who we called Word Harold. He acknowledged that this was an entity that was very, very different from the wonderful person I had married. And if you've ever been in a relationship with somebody who has a dual personality like that, it's a lot of trauma, because when your heart is invested, you experience a lot of pain. After 3 years, I had to move to Los Angeles. I just had to get away. And he was a very manipulative person, so it didn't work out where I could just like divorce him and leave. It was a situation where I just kind of needed to sort of finesse my way out of the relationship and say, look, we're going to remain good friends. But he lived in Dallas, I lived in Los Angeles. And we stayed on good terms. He wanted a reconciliation. Again, I got to move forward. 1 year after I was out in Los Angeles, I found out that he was arrested in Germany. And so that was kind of shocking. He traveled to Europe a lot because he had a business called InterSurf. But I was contacted by his lawyer that was assigned to him, and he asked me to please retain a lawyer for Sandy who would go over to Germany, and I did. I got involved. I went to Germany as well to visit him, and I was asked to go, again, I'm speeding forward real fast, to go find some funds that he had sequestered in some clandestine vaults. And if you know anything about the conspiracy statute, and the drug war kicked in, thank you, George Bush Sr., mostly Reagan Bush, but George Bush Sr. used it as campaign platform, and that's when all the laws really kicked in and changed. So conspiracy is if you do one thing, one overt act, you're guilty for everything that everybody else did. And by involving myself or even getting some money and moving it or hiring a lawyer or whatever, that triggers the conspiracy statute, which, I'm talking really fast, but anyway. So 6 months after I did that and visited my husband and found out about his arrest, I pulled into my garage and I was rushed by guys who were pointing guns at my face. Back then they were just wearing plain clothes. It wasn't SWAT like everything is today. And they flanked me and dragged me out of my car into my house, and that's when the pictures start.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. So if anyone here doesn't really understand what the big deal is with NSA and the massless surveillance data gathering that they do of our personal emails and stuff, I can explain what's wrong with it. Is once you become a target, or once the government has some interest in you personally, it's infinitely easier now for them to just look up your phone number and immediately find out who you communicate with, and it lends you wide open to their harassment tactics, which they didn't even have that back when this happened to me. But so I just press this one right here. Okay. So when they rushed me into the house, and it's so overwhelming because first of all, we entered through the kitchen. There were people in every room of my house who were pulling drawers out. Everything was in the floor. The refrigerator contents were in the floor. Everything was just crazy. This door was not, it wasn't even there. So until you've walked through your home and seen a hole in your home where a door used to be, you can't really process it. So I really couldn't even process what was happening to me. But this is after we tacked it up. I didn't even think to take any pictures very much of the damage that was done. And what pictures I did have, I only got a few back because they take everything every time they would raid me. But this was the first raid. And I was in a room over here. They threw me in a chair and they started telling me that we know that your husband is in prison, and we know that you know that he is in trouble, and he is a really bad guy. And it turned into the classic good guy, bad guy routine, where somebody was screaming at me that, you know, I'm in deep shit, I'm looking at a lot of time, and then somebody comes in who's the attractive guy and says, you know, back up, leave her alone, you know, like, back off, guys. Would you like some water? Amy, would you, would somebody please get her some water? So you've got kind of that energy going on. And this guy, the designated good guy, kneels down and he puts his hand on my knee and he's like, Amy, we're your friends. And while they're destroying my home, and that never ceases, I can hear them downstairs. It was downstairs, and then there was also a basement level, and you can just hear the destruction going on. And he said, look, we want to talk to you. And so then the process starts, where they start asking questions, and if you know the Miranda rights, anything you say can and will be used against you. Before you know it, they're putting words into your mouth. They're like, you know that Sandy was arrested, right? You know he's in Germany, and just a nod of your head can later turn into that agent testifying, saying she admitted it, she knew that, So I was in such shock at what had happened to me. It really had an adverse effect, because I think sometimes that maneuver works on people where it scares them. For me, I was just like a clam. I just was still trying to process what the fuck is going on here. So I just kind of let him do his maneuver, and that's when the whole test begins. When you're put in a situation where you're told you will either cooperate with us or we're going to indict you, and you're looking at 20 to life. And for me, that signals, it represents an energy that has surfaced on this planet time and time again. We know about McCarthyism, same thing, witches, Jews, you name it. It's just about demonizing a certain group of people and then having a governmental body or somebody come to you and try to threaten you and control your actions through fear. So because this whole thing started with such a beautiful experience, my talk was about faith over fear, because going forward, I had to make a decision as to what to do. But I want to show you just a little bit about what I was put through for 2 years. They told my attorney, I got to leave that day, but they told my attorney that they thought I was an invaluable tool, and they wanted me to infiltrate Sandy's organization, wear a wire, and I was just like, no, this isn't going to happen. So this was the first raid, and excuse me. So those were the first raid. This was the second raid. The third raid. The second one I didn't take any pictures of, and the second one was just a break-in where they tried to stage it and make it look like somebody had broken into my house. But when people break into your house, they steal something. They didn't steal anything. They just completely trashed it again. And then the third time I had moved, and they got another warrant and continued the harassment tactics. So one was one side of my bed, this was the other side of my bed. This is just different rooms. This is the kind of crazy stuff they do, because there's other bottles they don't touch, that kind of stuff. They pull it. This is the vacuum, light plugs, completely tearing everything apart, throwing. It's like a tornado hits your home. Again, a picture can never, ever, ever replace the trauma and the emotion when you see your home like this. This is how, I was in a duplex by this time, so this is how I normally look. This is the left wall, this is the right wall, and there was also a couch, and they ripped as they do. And they also brought stuff up from a store, kind of like a basement, and boxes, and they just would dump everything all over your house, because none of this stuff was in my living room. I think just for shock value is why they do a lot of the stuff, because it's just craziness. So for 2 years, they wanted me to cooperate. They infiltrated my friends. They broke into my employer's office. They rifled through his files, didn't steal anything again. Later I found out they were looking for ledgers, but they went to so many of my friends. So nobody is safe, because they go, I promoted nightclubs, and I also worked full-time for a guy who had the gas shut-off valve in the event of an earthquake. And those people are put into a situation where they're threatened. Why are you working with this woman? You know that she's involved in a big drug conspiracy. We can audit your books. They kind of rain terror on those people too, to the point where those people ostracize you. They're like, look, but, can you just sort of go away, because they want the heat to go away. They tried to get several of my friends to say that they'd seen me sell drugs. Not one person would, which is amazing, because if you have anybody who has an axe to grind, then there you go. So they take me to Waco, Texas, and that's another thing. I can't digress too much, but this whole thing is about money, and it's driven by money, and all of that kicked in the 80s, where small towns were given money if they could show they were prosecuting federal drug cases. And Waco had nothing to do with this case. Our case was out of Dallas, but they moved the case to Waco. I met many women in prison who had their cases moved from Austin to Waco, San Antonio to Waco. Why Waco? Well, because there was one judge there, and that judge was completely corrupt. He's also the one who gave all the Branch Davidians so much time, even though the jury didn't think that the victims that were tried later would get that amount of time. Anyway, I get 24 years. I'm held responsible for all the ecstasy that Sandy manufactured. Sandy cooperated, and later he came back to the US and he got 3 years probation only. He wasn't even disbarred, because he was a lawyer. Anyway, so then after a year in Waco, I get to go to the federal prison in Dublin. And again, this is my mom, my dad, and my grandmother. So this is kind of what prison looks like now, only, replace that with a black family, an Asian family, Hispanic family, because we've become the biggest penal colony on the planet. And anyone who exercises their right to go to a trial, the Thornburg Memorandum under the Bush administration said, pump them to the highest amount of time you can get them. So you're penalized if you go to trial. And the good thing that happened to me when you surrender and you don't allow fear to dictate your decisions, because I could have cooperated. Even my parents were like, why don't you just plead guilty? Why don't you just do what they want you to do? Well, because some of us can't be corrupted. I wasn't going to sell my soul. I wasn't going to do to others what I saw them doing to me. And basically they want you to testify against anybody who does go to trial, who won't cooperate. And I was more willing to surrender myself to this journey and experience it and see what happens and put my faith in God than I was to crawl into bed with the federal government. So John Beresford, some of you may or may not know who John is. John was the first person to ever order LSD from Sandoz in this country. And he was a doctor. Aldous Huxley told him about LSD. John, when he ordered it, he didn't know how much he was getting. He ordered 1 gram. And I wanted to get all the details. I wanted to get all the details correct. So I've been in touch with Dieter, and Dieter worked for Albert Hoffman, because I wanted to make sure I told this exactly right, because there's a lot of versions of this story. So that's 4,000. Some people say 10,000 hits. Dieter said no, it's 4,000 hits. John is the one who came up, because it's liquid, and he was like, how can I dispense this? And he came up with the idea of the sugar cubes. So anytime you see the sugar cube thing, that was John's idea. And John and Michael Hollingshead created something called Agora Scientific something together. And John wanted to do it therapeutically and be very responsible in an environment. And Michael was a little bit more cavalier about it or whatever. He turned on Timothy Leary and some other people. There's some debate about some of those facts. I'm not going to get into that. But John never wanted any notoriety. In fact, he always wanted to just kind of downplay everything. And so when you read about it, you see a lot about Michael Hollingshead, but you don't see much about John Beresford. John later became obsessed with the fact that people were going to prison for LSD, and he felt somewhat responsible. He is Buddhist, and he gave all of his inheritance away, everything basically that he had, to the Buddhist monks in Canada, so that they would buy some land and have a place. And he came here to the US, and I don't know how he did it because he didn't have a car, but he would just appear at prisons to visit us. Anyone who was in for psychedelics, and later any other people, didn't matter. He felt so much compassion for prisoners. And you'll see that on his mala is this little guy, and he passed away, and I'm wearing that with me today. But John talked to Albert Hoffman a lot about the prisoner situation. He always wanted somebody to get behind to put a face on this and to care and to want to talk about it. So he traveled around and devoted his life. Jonathan Ott, some of you may know who Jonathan Ott is. The beautiful thing about being in prison is that the community heard about my story, and Nancy Martz and other people who were serving time for LSD, and they literally took time out of their lives to come and visit, which, I mean, that's huge, to think that somebody in this crazy world, we're all so busy, would go to a prison and visit somebody they don't even know, and you have to lie. Because the prisons won't let anybody visit unless you fill out a form and say you knew that person. So it really is remarkable that these people came out of the woodwork. Mickey Norris, Chris Conrad, and Virginia Resner also came and visited me a lot. They're very much involved in the marijuana movement, and Virginia's no longer with us. But they put me on the cover of Shattered Lives, and these people really got involved in trying to help me regain my freedom, and others. And they're the unsung heroes. So anyway, they did a Free Amy campaign. I did a lot of praying when I was in prison, and asking for a sign from God, because we had a pact going in. And and there were times, I was in there for 9 years, 3 months. There's times where you're kind of like, where are you? But all of a sudden, it's almost like you sort of pass some invisible test, because all of a sudden, it's like a floodgate of activity has surged for me. And Glamour magazine, David France contacted me, and he did a feature on my story. Because he did a feature, it was easy to send the article to politicians. I filed for executive clemency. President Clinton was in by this time. And because it was, nobody's going to write a letter for you when they don't know what you actually did, and you can't send people your transcripts, and the transcripts don't say what happened anyway. But because of the article, I got over 15 sitting politicians who wrote letters saying, this is an outrage, this is not what we passed, this is not what we intended. But DOJ took the laws that they gave them, that they said were intended for kingpins, which were letting kingpins go free, and the wives and girlfriends and ancillary people were doing the long sentences that they say that were supposedly intended for kingpins. So there was a ridiculous flop. The sad thing is that nothing has changed. Nobody has tried to repeal the laws that they themselves were like, outraged that this was even going on. It's still going on. So here's Chris Conrad, Mickey. This is just 2 days after I got out of prison, and it was a shock. They just called me into the office, and they were like, you're going home. And Virginia Resner, who's no longer with us. Heather did time for LSD, and so did her boyfriend. And John Beresford was very involved with them as well. So these lovely ladies, Virginia and Mickey, they did an exhibit and traveled all over the nation and set up the exhibit to put a face on the prisoners. And they're really the unsung heroes, because it was really lonely back then. It's becoming more, there's more awareness. I don't know if you know, but John Legend has just gone all in and said he's going to launch a campaign to end mass incarceration. He's even performing at 2 prisons. So thank you, John Legend, because as Elizabeth Taylor stepped up for AIDS, and then everybody got involved when she did, I have a feeling that a whole bunch of artists are going to follow in Legend's footsteps. So, John, I'd like for you guys to look at the posters over there, because it shows the period. I threw his memorial, And unfortunately, I didn't see him. I was making plans to go see him when I got the call that he had passed away, September '07. And so it has the period where he has the LSD and also his work with prisoners, and then the last years when he was married to a woman named Virginia Blythe. So I really want to honor John, and I encourage all of you to learn a little bit more about him. He met with the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama told him, "You don't have to reincarnate anymore. You're done," unless he wants to. So anyway, oh, okay. So anyway, this is the same poster that's over there. At the memorial, because John was so devoted to prisoners, which is what I'm devoted to now. I have the Can Do Foundation, and I work tirelessly to try to spotlight the women I left behind and pot prisoners and other people who are serving draconian sentences. We released balloons with the names and pictures of prisoners and sent them up to John. This is a friend of John who came in and interviewed all of the LSD people who were in prison, John Humphrey. Ron Breton is a friend of John's John was determined to create an LSD museum. And a lot of people have tried, but nobody's done it. But John's passion was to create an LSD museum. I didn't have it because Ron just got it to me, so I didn't get it in the thing. But there's only one picture. And there was an LSD museum in Pasadena, and I'll show it to you. But anyway, it was, this is the only picture of it. And so John's dream did come true. But after a while, the foundation for that, they just couldn't continue to support it financially. And that's John's widow, Virginia. And lastly, these are all women I did time with. Sue Ann Charlton is, she served time for LSD. Her parents worked on the Manhattan Project. They were all scientists. And if you don't know what that is, that was like the atom bomb. And the kids lived out in the desert, and she has a fascinating story. Dorothy was in for marijuana, I was in for MDMA, and Nancy Marks got 30 years for LSD. And anyway, I just encourage you. I got out and started the Can Do Foundation, and I encourage you guys to just keep in mind anytime you have an opportunity to talk to somebody that we really have got to rein in the drug war and put an end to it altogether. And also, I did a documentary called 420, which is a couple of days from now. Yeah. And it's about the drug war, but I focused on marijuana and the whole 420 holiday as well. And if you guys want to ask me about that, I have some of those if somebody's interested. Anyway, thank you for having me, and I really, really appreciate you.